Okay, cool. I'm going to get started. If you can see my screen, just leave a comment. So if you have any comments during this, just ask me there. But the purpose of this is to be doing a live broadcast and to be sharing multiple screens. So you may see me go into my live editor here. But off to the side, it's a smaller view. So you'll see kind of a preview where you see myself right here. And then above me is my right-hand screen. And then over this way is my browser screen over here. And I have other views that we'll be sharing that are split like this, where you see more of my code being shown off here. And then also making sure my audio is coming. Yep. A view where it's a larger view of just this browser. So I'm going to be trying to switch it up as I go through this. The intention or goal of this today is to build out this page right here. So if you're looking at my screen here, you should be seeing kind of a large view that says Vibe, cashback, rebates. So this is actually the redesign for Vibe app.com. So currently, if you go to Vibe sites for our different marketing and company needs. So today, this is the focus on our standalone application, which is called the Vibe app. And you can get that on iOS and Android today to save money on beer, wine, and spirits. So to get started, I have this project already started in Git, and right now on this screen, you'll see just kind of white and this design over here. So I'm going to move this kind of around so it makes more sense visually. So we can kind of have this view of seeing the image off to the side here. And I'm also going to open up my Sketch program. So I use Sketch to design out all my applications. We actually had two different concepts that were put together on this. The Amazing Kyle Knapp put together one, and then from there I made a derived version of it. So this was the initial concept that we created, and from there kind of grew on it and made it a little bit more towards our brand and look and feel. So again, this is built in Sketch and in its own. So I'm going to change my view over here so you're seeing a closer up of this. So this is Sketch. This is my favorite design program for designing for the web. And what Sketch allows me to do is to really think about my design similar to how I'm developing it. And we have what's referred to an element collage. I've talked about this in previous videos, but what this has is our logo, various versions of our logo. It has all of our primary colors. It has things like our anchors kind of built out, the different hover states, as well as the various buttons that we have. We have a primary, secondary, and then this light and dark one. But we also have a tertiary one that aligns to the dark one. And I'll explain how that works in this demo. And then we also have this breakdown of our font sizes. So right here you'll see that there's an H0 through H6. So every interface has the largest font size being H1 and H6. But then I have this H0, which is header 0, which is really meant for a one-time use on your website. And the goal of that one is to have, I guess, something like a home page or hero section that isn't really repeatable, and it kind of stands out on its own if you want your text to be a little bit larger. From there, we have our primary font and our secondary font, and then from there, I've designed out all of our different header types. So every interface having a page header, subheader, section subheader, article header, article subheader, and paragraph. We also have our form elements down here. Ironically, I never completed out all this, but for where we are, these are the important ones, and actually our select ones are based off of how our input looks like. The cool thing about how this was built out is if I hover each of these, I've created them as their own kind of header or style grouping. And you can see all of them also are inside here. But then I've also created some symbols that are reused as I'm designing out. Why I bring this up and show you the element collage is that's actually how I build this out. So inside Sketch, you have the ability to add a library or save as a library. And what I've done is I took our element collage and I've added it as a library inside of Sketch. So I can actually access our style guide or element collage in any sketch file I have. So I don't have to have these hosted here. And as I update my element collage, I can update my design here. So it starts thinking the same way that you have object-oriented design in development. You can kind of apply the same things to web design inside of Sketch. And then from there, bringing in those pieces and adding in our design elements. Some of these were designed in Sketch, some of them were designed in Illustrator, but it tells you the story about how the pieces and parts and how to utilize our app. So basically what I'm going to do is take this as a guideline and build this out. So before I dive anywhere inside here, I just want to make sure that everyone can still hear me. And as of right now, there are no additional questions. Kevin, can you hear me? Vitaly, can you hear me? I think you're the only two that are on here. All right, cool. So it sounds like you guys are aligned here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my view back over to this view. If you have any questions, comments as I'm going through this, if I'm moving too slow, please just leave a comment inside and I'll respond to it. And then from there, I will backtrack or do anything. And I'm not looking at my phone or anything, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing and you're not sending me text messages because I probably won't see them. So in the top right above me will be the sketch file. Off to the left will be the output of the browser and then the code that I'm writing and then myself down there. If I need to make anything bigger, let me know. And this should be it. All right, so I am using Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a free text editor. Vitaly, who's actually in here in this chat, was the person that convinced me to move over there. I was a hardcore Sublime 2 fan for way too long, and I stuck on it longer than I probably should have. But the cool thing about Visual Studio Code is it's completely free, and I could import all my styles and all my settings from Sublime Text 2 and import them directly inside here. So what we're looking at here is the browser and then my text editor. And inside this project is a pretty basic setup. So I have my folder directory structure, and then inside here I have a source file, and inside the root of this I have a gulp file and some of the things that I have that I put into all my projects. This is in Git. So I do have a git ignore, and these are the things that I'm ignoring. So this is ignoring any file that's a .sass cache, so any of the things that are being generated by Sass itself. I'm ignoring all my node modules for this project itself. Any of those really fun things that Apple puts on your computer as you open up directories and indexes it, those are being ignored. And I'm ignoring my dist folder, which doesn't actually exist because it's down there as this folder. And then the documentation and my yarn lock and my package log. So these are things that won't be in my commits as I'm building out this project. Inside here, I have this light gulp file, and I actually worked on this project with someone that's also in the chat, Kevin over here. So if I go to Kevin's GitHub, this was actually derived from one of my repositories. So there's Kevin. Say hi to Kevin in the chat if you guys are also in there. So he has two repositories. One's called Demo Project, and this is something that we did when he came over because he wanted to learn a little bit more about project setup, as well as we went over some Git, and then also my framework UI arc.io, which we'll be going over today. But inside here, it has kind of the base setup. So you can follow him. So he has more than, I think, me just following him, but Kevin O Soup and Demo Project is where I actually started this project from. And then the framework that I'm actually using today is from my GitHub, which is Nicetransition. And inside here, we have UIArc.io, which is the open source framework that I have out here. This is actually in full, even though it says it's in beta release, it's actually in production ready. The only thing that isn't production ready in this is that the documentation isn't fully completed, but you can use it today. And I define it as a skinless user interface for creating modular scalable interfaces, meaning that this is different than other ones that exist out there, like your Bootstrap, because this isn't pushing design or UI components to you. This is like a book of recipes or a book of ingredients with some recipes, but these aren't pre-made meals. So that's the analogy that I'm going with, but ideally that these are supposed to be reusable, primarily focused on object-oriented CSS that you can use on any type of project. So this is on GitHub. I'm Nicetransition on GitHub. Like everything else, it's called UIArc.io. And that is pulled down from the project starting, or boilerplate was actually pulled down from Kevin O Soup's project. And I will go over what that is inside here. So we have this gulp file that's inside here, and what gulp is, it's a way to, I guess, speed up the development process and to do tasks and automate them so you don't have to do them. And with this has a built-in browser reload. So as I'm typing in my code inside the browser or inside my text editor, it's going to update in the browser here. So if I write hello, you'll see that it gets updated over here in the browser, so that actually outputs it. If I add styles here, so if I use one of the helper classes and hit save, this changes to that color. So you can see it's happening in real time. I don't have to refresh it, which is really, really awesome. And it's also building out my Sass. So I'm using Sass, which is a pre-processor language. So that's all those .scss files. And that's actually what UIArc is built into. And it's compiling it. So if I were to look at this, this is the application.scss file. If I said body, well, this isn't going to work. But yeah, I'll just do color is lime. And I hit save. This is going to update this, but it's probably going to compete with this guy right here. So let me change this. And let's wrap this in an H1 just for right now. And I'll do a type selector and just call it H1. And we have this guy here. Why this is really cool is I can use my mixins from Sass. And I've written a series of mixins inside of UIArc that are compatible if you're using Sass. So if I want to do something like @include page header -core and hit save here, this is actually going to bring in the page header styles inside here, which is pretty awesome. And if I wanted to do one of my other styles inside here, like the font size H0, so that's bringing in the styles of the page header from the sketch file, and now it's making it that size. So Sass has variables, it has mixins, and these libraries that you can call, which are really, really awesome. And it also has this built in, which is my library that I wrote called suffixcate. And what I'll do is call this red, and we'll give this a class called test. Before I show you this, this is on codepen.io /Nicetransition. And this is also on my GitHub. And what suffixcate does is it allows you to have suffixes at the end of your selectors, so you can identify whether they're large, medium, or small based off of the input variables that you have inside your project. So this does all the heavy lifting for you. And what that does is I see that this says hello, and I've added suffixcate. So throughout any size where there's a class test, it gets these. But if I were to put this all inside here, what I could say is, oops, tests at large, and that styling's only going to show on large screens, and at small screens it's going to go away. I can create another variable that's called test2. And for small screens, I'm going to give it, a lime color, and I'm going to make it be our article subheader. And the font size will be 4. And I'm going to say test2 at small. So at small sizes, it's going to bring in that style. And then at large screens, it's going to bring in that. Now, if I wanted one to do the reverse of it, I could do this. And say large. And then I'm going to make a third example here where it's just consistent across all sizes. So this top one's going to stay the test1 styles, and then this one's going to stay the test2 styles, and then this third one's going to have the reverse of this one. So if I hit save here, you can see that these are going to kind of dance around and do different things. I think I messed up here. Oh, this is just called test. There we go. So those are actually reversing styles on that. So that's what suffixate does. It adds a suffix at the end of it, so you can add additional styles on it. I'm covering that really quick. I have other videos where I do that. Another library that I use a lot, which is another one that I wrote, is this GitHub on GitHub, and it's also on my Codepen. I'll go to Codepen. And it's a scalable library. And this is a purely written CSS. Well, the output of it is purely CSS, but what it allows you to do is to scale your text without any JavaScript. And it is a Sass library because it needs the variables that you need to put in. The cool thing about this is if I change this to, see, page header, and then I made page header scalable. This top one is going to scale based off of the browser size, and the bottom one won't. So when it gets larger, you can see that it kind of shrinks down, and that one stays the same. These can be applied all the way to the root element and go all the way down. I'm going to take a moment just to make sure that there's no questions. It doesn't look like it. It looks like Kevin was the last person to say, hey. So with that, if everyone's good, I think I'm going to move on into actually building this out. Oh wait, I forgot. I was going to talk about the gulp file. So inside this gulp file, I have some configurations which are just pointing to my source files. I actually customized it to optimize for my performance while doing a live broadcast. So inside here, it's a little bit different than the project that I showed you on GitHub. But this is a series of tasks that are inside here. So this is the color generation, which is actually from a JSON file. So in my element collage, I talked about my color names, and I actually create the variables that way. So I create color primary dark based off my element collage, and then I add the value for it. And then for every color, I make the contrast for it. So if I do a search for this, and I do contrast, it is a color that's right here that will pass the web accessibility standards from the web content accessibility guidelines. And that way, whenever I'm using these colors as a background, it actually brings in the appropriate colors. So for example, if I change this body class to have U primary, which is my primary color, -BG for background, it will go there. If I change it to secondary, it brings in my secondary color with the appropriate color. If I change this to light, it brings in light and then brings in the color that's associated with it that's defined inside here. So that way I can make sure that this is passing all accessibility standards, and I don't have to worry about these. These are set up one time, and I just use a tool like WebAIM, color contrast, to make sure that the colors I'm using are passing the accessibility guidelines. So if I bring this up and I change this from this color, you can see that it's passing the ratio. If I were to do black on white, which is the highest, that is 21. But if I were to do something like black and then my favorite, 666, you can see that it does pass for AA, fails at AAA, which is actually surprising. If I went a little bit darker and I said, how about 0101, 01, this fails. So you want to make sure that you're passing for at least AA. AAA is the goal for text, and then this gives you the breakdown, and normal text is based around a 16-point font. So that's that for the libraries and the naming conventions inside here. But going back to the gulp file here, so that's the color generator. And then inside here, this is a fork version of a documenting tool that I like to use. And I'm actually building out my own, so it's a little bit more performant. But for right now, this is what's out there, and it's kind of the holdup of why the UI-arc hasn't been released. This is the SAS watcher, so it's looking at my configuration from the core, and it's pointing to this directory from the root. So inside here, I've sourced my SCSS and then all of my breakdowns of my files. It's looking for those. I'm using a prefixer, so it has compatibility for older browsers, meaning that if I'm using something like Flex and I put the last 3 versions, I'll add the browser prefixes so make sure it renders it correctly. You can go all the way back to 5, which will have some support for IE10. But IE10 is a horrible thing to support. And then it has the output for each of these. This is the one that I wrote earlier for really speeding up the process for this demo. And then this is what generates my SAS documentation from UI-arc. So UI-arc actually has inline documentation. So if I were to look at grid inside here, let's go to grid. That's a bad example. Grid flex. So each of these have their own examples built into it. So you don't actually need to open up any documentation. By looking at the source code, every single piece is broken out and it gives you even examples of how to use it. And this was also written in a way that it follows ITCSS. So we have settings, tools, then we have generic elements, objects, components, and then trumps here or utility classes. And then, for example, if I look at objects, so if I go to what I have here is global. Global is bringing in global. Global right here has, these breakdowns of objects, tools, generic elements, objects, components, and trumps. So this was organized, again, under ITCSS. And then a core breakdown of something that I'll show when we get into the coding side of it. But if I look at the example of objects, where it's 04, and I open up this, and I go to objects, where is objects? Right here. Objects contains all these individual pieces. So then if I'm focusing on grid, it has underscore grid, which is being included inside here. And then grid has all the different various types of grids that exist out there. So if I were to focus on float or flex, here's the documentation for it, and that's actually how it's built out. If I wanted to do a project where I didn't need all the different various types of grids, I could actually go in here and comment out things like tabular, which is primarily meant for tabular data or support for older browsers. If I knew I just wanted to use the grid that's newer to CSS, I could do that. If I knew I would never use floats, I could just comment this out to shrink up my output. And if I just wanted to use the objects inside here from my global here, I could remove these other pieces inside here. So it's written in a way that's really organized. If I just wanted to have the helper classes for things like positioning, I could just include this in my project. the typography helpings, which are like alignment for your text. If I wanted to follow the pattern that I have for glyphs and using ICO Moon, you can do that here. Or if I wanted to turn these off, I could easily do that. But these are all kind of built in there, so you have a full suite. And the SAS documentation actually outputs a documentation file inside this project where I can reference it and actually view it in a visual way. So if I were to open that up, you can see that this generates all these different files. And I'll just go to index and open this in the browser. Oops. And here's the documentation that's built into it. So this is all generated based off your project. As you update your CSS, it will actually update the documentation for you because it's all inline built. But if you need like help or suggestions on the DOM or how to use something, all the references are actually built inside here. So I will be referencing those as we build this out and kind of going from there. Open this back up here. All right, so last thing, the fonts, images, they're just watchers, and it outputs them in a dist folder. So these are my pre-compiled code. So my HTML file, my images, before they're processed, my SAS, and then they get output out as something that could be uploaded. So my dist folder is something that would upload to the server at the end, and that's more production ready. And then this is all, everything in source is development, what I'm working on. Node modules are the packages that are built out from my package.json, so the things that are required inside here and installed locally to this repository. So these are all the different things inside there. If someone could comment, just make sure I'm not just talking to myself, that would be great. Last comment was sweet. I see Vitaly with a hi. Thank you. All right, cool. So lastly here, we have this server that's coming up, which is running. I'm using Browser Sync for that, and it's watching all my files, what I showed you in the live. And then down here is my default task, which is going to run my HTML, build out the dist folder, move the fonts, colors, all these other things ahead of time, and then it's going to start my server. And I have my configuration for development turned off. So how I'm actually running this is from terminal inside here. And if you can see right here, I'm running this. All I have to do is be inside my project directory, which is right here. So if I list this out, you can see all these different things inside there. And I like to use yarn. If I say yarn start, it's going to run through all these. It's going to install all the required packages and build this out and kind of go from there. And then we can start developing this out. In future videos, I can do something just on probably one of those topics very easily. So if you have any recommendations on future classes, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am trying to make these be as useful to you as possible and to base them around asks or want of people in the community. All right, so this is building out right now, and then we're going to get into actually building out this, this design. I'm going to make this full screen. So it does take a few minutes to get going, but then once it's ready, it's going to be way quicker. I don't know why I have the hiccups. I ate dinner right before doing this, which was a bad idea, and it was super spicy. So I apologize for any hiccups that I may have. Yeah, so the question that I just got from Kevin says, Yarn makes it run faster. Yeah, so what Yarn is, it's something that I install globally on my machine, and it runs in collaboration with Node, and what it does is it speeds up the process that you're running. and it also has a little bit different of a way of how they do their packages. But by having a package.json, and if you use npm, all you have to do is write this once on your machine, install the package globally. So on a Mac, it is just this, sudo npm install -g yarn. And by running that line and hitting enter, it'll install yarn on my machine. And instead of running npm start or gulp, I can run yarn start, and it will go out there and speed up the development process for me. Either way, it's going to get the same way. If you run npm start or yarn start, you're going to have the exact same output. So it's not really that big of a difference. I've just been doing it this way recently. All right, so first things first, I have my index file inside here. I have other presentations where I talk about global style guides, and UIArc was developed from it. So inside my CSS, before I actually build these out, I have something called a global CSS, a brand CSS, and application.css. Global are pieces of my design that are globally accessible. They're really unbranded, but they're structural. So if and I can show you this as I build this out, but just to show you a quick demo, if I were to use one of the helper classes that are built into UIArc, which is ogrid, and I'm actually going to use an unordered list here. Hold on. I'm going to create just a 2-column grid here and say ogrid 2. Hit save would be helpful. So this is a 2-column grid, and if I want to get rid of these bullets here, I can use unlist, which changes it from a list into more of any structure like a div. I use brackets in between to separate out the difference between my utilities, my components, my styles, as well as my objects in between. This is purely for stylistic purposes of having my code written that way. So it's like o-grid and these. So the idea is to group them. And if I create a component that has requirements inside here, I will put ***, meaning that anything inside the star should not be edited, and anything outside of it is a variable that isn't required. So calling this like primary, where the color is going to have the primary color, isn't a requirement for the structure. It just adds that to it. Just to show you how these look, I'm going to say uBorder around these, which is utility border. And now they all have these borders. And a really cool thing with grid is I can do gap, and it's going to gap these out, which, you know, this was like the holy grail in the early days of the web, to build out something that looked like this. And with just one class, I can do something like that, which is pretty rad. But as you can see here, all this stuff's inside here. I've added this uPrimary, which is bringing my brand style inside here. If I were to get rid of brand and application, this structure will still exist. It just doesn't have any of my branding or colors inside of it. So UIArc can just use the global if you want to. And the cool thing about this is, as I create patterns or anyone creates patterns in UIArc, they're completely reusable from one project to another. And the idea is to create different patterns around content, not around the design. So having global components that are used from one project to another. So I'm going to add those back in. If you do a YouTube search and you put Kevin Mack and you say style guide, you will find multiple presentations of me talking about the exact same thing. I think this one is probably my favorite, the digital style guide, digital branding and component layers, the style guide layers, where I actually talk about the various types of style guides, and somewhere in the middle here I talk about the layers of style guides, which is, this is all broken off. So if I go here, there's global, there's brand, there's application, and campaign. So you can see right here, global is UIArc, branding are styles for my component, and then application are for the specific project itself. So that's about 20 minutes into this presentation where you can have a deeper dive inside that. All right, so Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my view here. So this is a little bit more visually helpful to see what I'm actually doing from a code perspective. So give me one quick second here. And I'm going to move this guy over here. And on the left-hand side, you should be seeing my code. On the right-hand side, you should be seeing my design. What I like to do is I like to think of my designs as a concept, not the final deliverable, because what I build in here is actually going to be the final deliverable in my code. But as I'm building out my designs and as I'm doing my designs, I'm thinking about how they live in the responsive atmosphere. So how a design can be transformed from small screens to large screens. So I know as this gets smaller in my design, I'm going to have to do something with this image. And this is probably going to be the most difficult piece in how to make it work on mobile. So I have the option of easily putting it on the top. I could also treat this as a background image, so it just goes behind the text, which will make this be very difficult and hard to read from a legibility standpoint. I could do something really tricky and put it in between here, but the benefits of doing that aren't really that high. And one of the things I want to do for this design, and I won't be getting into this today, is this is all going to be animated. So even though this is design and visual only goes right here, this is actually going to take up a larger spot and it's going to go behind this whole thing. So from an ease of use as well as what makes sense is I'm going to have my font actually scale down using my scaling library. And this font's going to get smaller. My image is going to get smaller. This text will get a little bit smaller and will stay relatively the same because I actually designed this for in respects for mobile. So the width of this was the idea of this would be a mobile width and maybe one or two words would drop down underneath it. But I'm going to move this design underneath this. So on mobile, it's going to go below these buttons inside here. And then this layering effect is right here. We can see that this would be a typical box for my code. And I like to think of my designs almost in a grid format here. So this is going to be one zone, which I call the header up here. And then I'm going to have a main section here, which will go to all the way down here. And that will have its own div. But with this, you can see that this is breaking outside of it. And how I'm going to do that is through CSS. And I'm going to use a before pseudo class and then just kind of fake it and rotate it on the side to give it that effect that this background image is going up there. For this is going to be a header with a solid background color, and then I'm going to have an after that has a z-index lower where it's layered underneath and gives it that drop shadow effect. This is also rotated at a small degree, so if I were to open up this in Sketch, you can see that this is rotated. And when I was designing this out, I knew that I wanted to build out various types of rotations that I will be adding to our library because our brand has evolved. So this bibapp.com is the first one, but bibapp.com is going to be the first one. Bib.com is going to be the next one, which is going to be a little bit more robust. So I'm going to start building out components that are going to be reusable. But if I look at this and the rotation, this has a -2 rotation on side there, so I want to make sure that I'm building that inside there, so I'll do that through CSS. And then each of these are also slightly rotated, and even though my images are rotated here, when I do the production on these, I'm going to make them straight, so not at -10. They're going to be cut this way, and I'm going to rotate them in the browser because that gives me a little bit more flexibility to do that. Something that these were put together in a rush. So one of the things I'm going to later on do is optimize them and actually make them SVGs. For purposes of today and probably the initial launch, they're going to be in PNGs that are optimized. But then I'm going to make them into SVGs and actually have little subtle animations on each of these. So you can kind of see like the hand tilt a little bit. So it will do something similar to like this. If you can see me, like it'll just move so subtly that the probably untrained eye wouldn't see. but it's something that, I like to do. And then also having like the background layer of the foreground and the background having a slight shadow of like 5%. So when they move, there's a slight movement that's going on. So that's also going to be built in there in the future. But purposes of today, they're going to be PNGs that I'm going to tilt. Inside here at the bottom, this is just going to be a div with a background image that's going to be scaled across. Footer works the same way. Is we're going to have a pseudo element. I'm going to use a border just to do that. And then this is going to be a basic grid that's kind of cut down in the middle. And I will do all the rotations inside there. One of the most tricky pieces that I will have to do is this little line. And it's something that I added in at the last minute just because I like little challenges. And another piece of this is I want these not to look like the scale they are. I want them to be like really big. And that's how I'm actually going to achieve this background, is by scaling this up and actually rotating those from one object to another. There are various ways of doing it. It's not easy to do, but we're going to take a stab at it. And I probably won't have that all completed in this video. That may have to be a follow-up at a later time. But one of the things I know is this is my page header. And if I look at my sketch file here, I know which header type I'm using. So this is actually a section header. This is going to be my paragraph style. This is actually my page header. These are my paragraph header. And then the styles inside there are based off of whatever they are. So if I were to highlight one of these, it says paragraph style, but they're based off of the elements from the element collage. Cool. So going back to my design, I'm going to put together a real rough outline of what my code will look like. So as I said, I'm going to first put this all in one container. And it's going to be O container. Inside of O container, I'm going to have an O container wrap. And what this does is if I do some lorem ipsum here and hit save, go back to my browser. If I were to make this larger, so again, there's O container. If I could spell, and I have O container here, you can see that it goes and it's based around here. So this is based around my max width of my container. I also have the option of saying O container inner, which is my max width that I really want content to be. So I have two various ones. Cool thing about these are they have built-in kind of gutters. Again, that's all part of UI arc. And they're centered in the page. So I'm going to use container wrap, and that's inside of O container. My iPad went to sleep, which is how I'm watching comments. Before I move on to anything else, just want to make sure everyone's still able to hear me and seeing what I'm doing. Please leave a comment. Comments are kind of delayed on this. Okay. So I'm building out the structure. O container wrap is the max width down here, as I was showing, and they're all in these containers. So as I said, there's really three main sections here. There's this O container wrap, and then the footer down there. So I'm just going to copy this really 3 times. And I'm going to call this one C-intro section. I use the -C in the beginning. That stands for component. -O stands for object, so object-oriented pieces, so unstylistic. Components have their own styles. They're also used for things like namespacing. So if I want to do something like every C-page header inside here and C-intro section is lime, I could easily do that in my CSS. And then the U stands for utility. And then this section, I'm going to call this how it works. And ideally, you're creating names that aren't as semantic as I am here, but this is a single page site. If I realized that I wanted this exact pattern to be used on another page, which I actually will, and it will actually be called How It Works. So this one kind of works for me. I'm going to kind of, even though it's a component, I'm going to still make these be built and written in a way that they are reusable in other sections. And then I'm going to call this, instead of calling it footer, I'm going to call it outro section, because end of day, this is going to live in another website. So we will have the global and application from vibe.com, which will have shared navigation from this page to another page. But for right now, this is just me kind of thinking ahead instead of calling it C footer and C header here, because we don't have those. All right. Now that I have my main sections kind of built out here, what I'm also going to do is now focus more on an individual section. So we're going to look at this intro, and then I'm just going to put in all the components that I need. So it's going to be image, and I'm just going to use placehold it, and just do something around the size of it. And I'm just going to call this Vibe logo. And then underneath that, I will have my H1, which is reserved for one per page. So it's going to say cache back, and I'll copy that later. And then I'm going to do a paragraph, and I'm just going to utilize this lorem ipsum here. I'm still getting used to the shortcuts in Visual Studios. If I was in Sublime Text, I would have just wrapped that way more easily. And then underneath there, I know there's going to be another paragraph that's going to say available on. And then I'm going to make an unordered list, and it's going to have the image, which is going to be in an anchor. And image inside here, that's GP, placehold it. Relatively 70 by 35, and this is going to say get it on Google Play. And this is going to have a title tag that says download on Google Play, download the Vibe app on Google Play. And then I'm going to copy this and say so the alt tags are supposed to be, if the image doesn't load, it should be a pure description. If it has text, it should be one for one what it is. That's why I say get it on Google Play. So this is there. It's for accessibility, web content accessibility guidelines, as well as screen readers that are out there. It helps on SEO. The title tag is, once I hover over it, it gives me instructions. It's usually more of an actionable item on what to do. And those are the images. So an image tag with source being the link to the image, alt tag being that fallback. And I'm going to say available online, which is an A tag, and highlight this. And put or on. And this is actually going to go to a website, which is app.vibeapp.com. And this is going to say use the Vibe app online. And I'm going to add a target, which is equal to underscore blank, which will open it in a new window. So when I click on this link, once I designed it out, it's going to open up in a new window. I actually want the same for those guys. So when these are clicked, they do that. And then I'm going to add the image here, which is going to be this guy. And I'll just give it a random size of 400 by 200. And then say illustration of computer tablet and mobile device using Vibe app. All right, so this section, if I were to go back to my browser and look at it, you can see that this is not very elegant or that exciting, but this is all kind of just put in there as placeholders. And I have kind of a structure here. The reason why I like to do this first is it helps me identify how this is going to look on a browser where there are no styles being applied to it. So if the CSS doesn't load or someone's on a device, like a mobile device, I can start planning out the priority of the content and how it's going to be loaded out there. So now getting into the next section here. And if you're wondering, I'm using Size Up. So Size Up is this amazing app which allows me to kind of move my browser around with just controls. So it's one of the highest recommended plugins for OS X I could ever do or recommend. And then I also use Divi, which allows me to kind of break something into, different designs. I did not mean to do that. I hit the wrong button. I haven't used Divi in a while. So if I wanted my preview just to be in these squares, I could do that. If I wanted to be here, I could do that, which is really cool. So those are very helpful tools. So anyways, I'm going to move into the next section here. So I have that kind of like outlined on how I want that to work. This section, I'm going to get rid of this. And I might as well just get rid of this. And I'm going to add in an H2 here because this is the element that I will be needing. Stop going in capital. All right, weird. My computer was just going nutso on me. There we go. So inside here, it's going to say how it works. And then I'm going to have these different sections. Now, there's various ways that I could set these up. And I could do these as a list, which this is an order list. So I'm actually going to treat it as an ordered list. And inside here, I'm going to add an image. And I'll just do a placeholder. And I'll make these squares, 200 by 200, and call this off to offer an app. And then I'm going to add in a description here. New offers, blah, blah, blah. And I'm actually going to think about how these are going to be structured. Technically, I shouldn't be using a paragraph tag or an image inside of a list, but I'm going to anyways. And before I build out all these, we're going to be kind of stuck on this. Kevin asks Giddy, what is it called? Divi is the thing that I use. Divi. And it's awesome. So instead of building out multiples of these, because I know what those will do and they're all kind of repeating the same pattern, it's just every other, I'm going to say repeat this and say byproducts. And say byproducts here. Oops. And I know that these repeat back and forth, so we'll come back to that. I just want to show what that looks like inside the browser here. So You can see that this section is now being numbered as 1, 2, view offers, buy offers, and that section is kind of completed as a pattern, and this one is. So I'm looking for patterns as I'm developing this out, as I'm writing the code, so I can think about the best ways of like handling the actual build out here. And then at the end of this, in this main section inside here, I'm going to add in something here. So you know how I have this container here? I'm going to actually add another container. And I'm going to add how it works. After the closing of this, so there's O container, and how it works if I collapse this, I'm going to add another div inside here. And this is going to be that footer that's changed. Oh my God, I hate this. And cool. That's one of the annoying things in Visual Studio. I'm sure there's a benefit for it, but I just haven't learned it yet. And this is where the bottles are going to actually live in the code right here. So there's a div here, and I'm actually giving this another O container. And an O container just gives it the far full width, and this is where we're going to have a different background color. And then in O container, I'm going to add O container wrap, which will give it that fixed width. And then I'm going to add that image, and I'm going to say placehold it. Say 1,000 by 300. Drawings of bombs beer spirits. And then the last section here is going to be this outro. Inside here, we have this container wrap, and that's good. It's going edge to edge. But we're going to have two different divs. We're going to have an unordered list here, which is going to have an anchor, and that's going to say sign in. And this is going to go to a direct link of the BiBAP. And let me pull that right now so I don't forget that, because I do stupid things like that all the time. And Vitaly, who's also on here, was one of the lead senior devs on this project that helped bring this to life with me. Oops. So I'm just going to put that link inside there. And then I'm going to copy this and say create an account. And then underneath that is another unordered list, which says terms and condition. And this is how you do a special character, an ampersand. It's this and amp, semicolon. And privacy policy. I won't go out and get those right now. And then underneath that, I'm just going to add a paragraph tag, which is going to say all rights reserved, and copy, which is the copyright symbol, 2019 Vibe Inc. Lastly, I'm going to add in our image, which will go actually above here, even though in the DOM structure, it seems like it would go afterwards. Is that where I want to do it? Yeah. Just trying to think of the best place for me to put that. Because on mobile, do I want it to go above or below? Or in between these? Let me think about that. For right now, just because I don't feel like thinking, I'm just going to put the image right here and say image. And this will just go to and not open up a new window. Same thing with these. I don't want them opening up a new window. I want to drive the traffic there. Say visit 5.com. The reason why I didn't use a punctuation inside of like terms and condition is the screen readers read it differently, and for like SEO benefits, I try to do a combination of both without kind of blasting away or trying to trick bots. But this is just, you know, it's the same thing but read two different ways. So I try to mix the two if I can. Actually, we'll say this. Because that kind of gives me benefit for SEO purposes too, to have these broken down. All right, so if I look at my DOM here, it is really kind of bare bones. It's not really that sexy or that cool. If I were to look at my page here and the output of this, I have this. It's not responsive, but it is a good skeleton of what this page should be. So now that I've done this, this is typically where I would do a git commit. So I'm going to say git add, which is going to add the files. If I hit git status, you'll see the files that have changed inside there. So the index change as well as this application file. I could see the changes of them if I wanted to. And I'm going to say git commit m and then give it a message. So base DOM structure created. What this is this is going to be, these are staged. These are modified things because I've already committed them once. I've added them in there by saying git add period, which git add period adds everything that's unstaged, makes them stage. Typically, you would want to do individual files that align to your commit that you're doing. And I write git commit -m and then a description of what it is. And that's where it becomes kind of like I can't think what it's called, like not a history. I just did a video on Git with Vitaly and I can't think what it is. But basically what this will look like in my logs is what this description is and the files that were changed. I hit this, I hit git status. Now there is no items changed, but I'm ahead of my remote branch. So if I say git push origin develop, I'll push that out there to my GitHub repo, and those are available out there. So if I wanted to look at this on GitHub, go to github.com/Nicetransition and the project itself, I can see that I did a commit 25 seconds ago, and I can see all my previous commits that are inside here, and I can see the changes that actually happened on that commit. So all the updates that I just made. So I'm going to close out of that. Now what we're going to do is add styling to this. So some base styling to make this come to life. So I'm going to change my browser view here. So hello and update to this one. So in the right hand screen, you will be seeing my sketch file. Oops. And on the left hand, you'll see my code as well as this design right here. Is that what everyone is seeing? Does that make sense? Okay, so first things first, I'm going to look at the colors that are here. I do have the element collage kind of always handy. Usually have it printed off in front of me, which if you were to see me, you would see this. Here's my element collage and it's in front of me. So I have a reference to all the different colors and everything that's out there. And this becomes my handy guideline for what I'm actually building out. So I don't have to take up my browser window and I can just have this in front of me as I'm building it out. So here we are. So one of the things I have to realize first is what color to make the background. And because my top section and my bottom section are both this like purple color, that's actually my secondary color. I'm going to make that be my body color. So I'm going to say U, which is utility, dash secondary, dash BG, which is the color in my style guide for the secondary color, and put that inside there. And that's actually built out. So next thing I'm going to do is look at the middle section and define what color that would be. And that is U dash dark accent dash BG. And now it gets that color. So these are the two different colors that are being used right now. The weird thing is some of these colors, our brand is really fun and awesome. But I'm going to actually update it to the U dark. I think it was actually the printout that made that look a little bit different. So U dark was actually the color that I wanted to use inside here and to utilize for this. And U dark accent is this one. So now we're starting to see some branding coming through here. Nothing too major, but it's a start. Another thing you can also do is you can add this to the HTML tag, but it's not really preferred. But it's out there. And then what I'm going to do is in my sketch file, I'm going to highlight this and be like, all right, so it's a section header inside here. So I'm going to add in my helper class from UI_arc, which is C-section header. And I'm going to make it be the scalable one that I talked about earlier. I'm going to copy my code here. And I want to write my text not in camel case, but in the way that I would want this to come across in Google. So if this was a sentence that was unstyled, how would I want this to show? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add a dash here because I think that reads a little bit better, and call it cashback rebates for this. But visually, I don't want to see that. So if I hit save here, you'll see cashback rebates for beer, wine, spirits. I don't want to show that, so I'm going to add a span inside here and hover it over on top of this. And say uvis0. And then what I have to do is add a space. Shoot, that won't come across the way that I want it to be. So I'm just going to go back to how it was, because then I would have to add another character inside there. Yeah, I'm going to add just a space there. Forget that I said that. But this is how I wanted to come across from a web browser. And because these are all together, the Oxford comma was misused there. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the color for this, which is right here. And I'm going to say U primary. So now we have that color coming in. And these are all pre-built, and these are all inside of UI_arc. So if you were to build out your own, the setup and start for this is inside brand. You add your colors inside this JSON file. And then in brand core, in your typography, settings typography, you define your primary font, your secondary font. You align it to the element collage. You create your H0 through H6s, as I talked about earlier. And then you create the mobile sizes for them, so how small you want them to be. So this goes from 56 to 48. This goes from 48 to 32. This goes from 36 to 26, and the breakdowns inside there. And then you want to just style appropriately the buttons the way that you want to. And these have their own mixins, so button core, you create each of them, button base, primary button, the styles for them, and by doing the updates just to buttons, CTAs, buttons, and anchors, as well as typography, and then updating that JSON file, you have a pretty diverse amount of components that you need to build out your site. So go back here, save. And visually you can see that rebates breaks down here. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a span around this. And I'm going to use a class, and I'm going to use this u-dis, which stands for display, -b. And what that gives me is a block. So it changes this span into a block element right here. So it's visually that way. And another thing I'm going to do is add another span around and spirits that has an inline block. So once we do get smaller screens, the and spirits, if beer and wine have to break, those stay together. And I'm going to do the exact same for cashback. So cashback are this way. So visually they all look the same, but this is just how, if we want this to break differently, we can. Add this here. So once we get to really small screens, which that's not going to happen here, but if I go like this, you can see like the and spirits breaks down together as opposed to having spirits as an orphan child or an orphan element. And the same thing goes with cashback, where it makes those kind of break down together. So that's kind of just thinking ahead as you're building out the code that you have, and you can see that the code scales down appropriately and the way that we wanted to do it. All right. So the next thing is I'm going to steal this copy here. And if this was being built out into CMS, I would be thinking about minimum and maximum lengths of my elements and building it around kind of a content strategy for these pieces and parts. I'm just refreshing the comments because I realized that mine were kind of behind, so I apologize for that. Yes, I will make the code be slightly larger. And with that, I'll make this slightly smaller. And I will use Divi to make it be like this and this. Oh, another thing that I do when I'm designing is I design my designs at 768, which is the iPad vertical size, which then as the design gets larger, it allows me to have more space. And a lot of times I just center it in the middle, as opposed to having to look at my designs from large screens, tablet screens, and then mobile screens. I like to focus on kind of all the above. Okay. Kevin, I hope this is better for you to see here. I can make it even a little bit bigger, and hopefully that makes it easier. Thanks, Vitaly. I know how to make my text bigger. Is this better? All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at, so I have these now different paragraphs inside here. I like to have this set up where I call it a container. So I say C container, so I mean content block. And then I create C content block underscore header, so following BEM. And then I make one for main. And then I make one for footer. And what this allows me to have is just a consistent pattern in between all my spacing for headers to main paragraph text and everything in between. And I'll put this inside here. And I'm going to put these in the footer. So these will be kind of spaced out a little bit differently. And then I'm going to add in this helper class, which is U space sections. And I'm going to say SM, actually I'm going to say fixed. So they'll have 20 pixels space in between them, which will give that kind of a nice in-between space of these. And then I'm also going to say U size 3 max, which is a part of, again, UI arc, and it's in the documentation, which that gives it a nice width of my screen is now too small, and it won't allow me to do this. So if I look at this, that's 236, maybe a little bit too small. I can go 2, which is a little bit wider, and that goes to my width of 355, which is pretty nice. I may keep it at that. And in reality, I kind of want the same for the header, but it doesn't really matter. It's just this main content right there has that width. Next thing is I need to look at my online. So this guy. And I'm going to add a class called UCAnchor. CAnchor. I can't remember which one's which. So this is primary. And now it's that color. I don't want the underline underneath online, so I'm going to say default, and it removes it there, but it has the styling from my style guide that I created. And then I'm going to make this be U primary bold. Oops. Oh. I can't remember my name for bold. Oh, that's stupid. Give me a second. U-B bold. Huh. I don't know why that's not working. Stranger things have been known to happen in a live event. Maybe it is, and it's just not showing up on there. I don't know. I'll come back to that, but that should be bold. It's just not coming through right now, so not going to worry about it or dive into it too much. So then the next thing is looking at these guys. I want them actually to be left and right of each other. I'm going to add this, and I'm going to make them be flex. and I'm going to say oflex wrap. So if they get small enough that they'll wrap with each other, I'm going to remove the UL class and say unlist and add this bracket here. So they're like that. And then I have various ways of kind of spacing this out. A new thing that I wrote is grid space, which adds a space around everything inside there. So it's looking at the children. But then there's also a between, which is nice, and it just spaces in between. And then I can do -SM, so it's just a smaller break in between, which is really nice. If I want to go even tinier, I can use -tiny, and it looks like that. I can then, because these are like, I'm going to say use space 1 small. So it has that space there. So that's kind of built out that way, which is cool. Another thing that I'm realizing is if I look at my line breaks here, which is a good way of kind of identifying my fonts and everything, this is looking a little bit smaller. So I'm going to say paragraph header scalable, and I'm going to do 3. Cache back. It's a little bit too small here. I can go 2-SM. Oops. Or maybe I just do this. When all else fails, add a space on the right-hand side. And I'll do the @large here. Look at that. That's almost 1 for 1, with the exception of with cashback rebates. What I like to do is kind of align words as I was doing earlier. So like this with vibe, and wrapping them in an in break. So you can see that that line broke without having to do a paragraph break. So if there was room, it would do that. And then also like this within 48 hours. Oops. And then adding a style to this. Yeah, Vitaly, I tried that. I may have just turned off that library by mistake. So Vitaly was asking me about the U-B-bold, which that should work, but for some reason it's not. Let's try it one more time. Very odd. But if I made this a bold class, it would work. Or a bold element. The mysteries of the world. Who will know? And other words, like if I don't want them to be ever separated, like mail-in rebates, I may not want those to ever break apart how they are. So I can put that like that. So those words are always combined with each other. Jeez Louise. And then I would probably do other words. So the final version of this, I'm going to go through and update these to make sure that they align the way that I want them to be. Oh, I see why that keeps happening. I copied that wrong. Nice. But anyways, and that's just avoid that orphan child at the end of it, so it's always connected. Okay. So now those two guys are that set up, and then I'll have to do image production on that and output it. And now we're going to get into the next section. We'll come back to how this image is being loaded on this page, where it's just like kind of floating down there. That will take a little bit of work for us to do, and we'll come back to it. Oh, and I completely forgot about the Vibe logo, which will go inside here. And with this guy, I'm going to add a class that's called uFull. I'm also going to create something here that's going to be a so the U full allows it to go 100%, but allows it to scale down. And I'm going to say U size to max goes there to 4. Cool. And I can clean that up a little bit more if I actually want that to align with how the rebates is. It's not really that important for this, but just good to know that I can do that. And also my font's really thrown off now because I've made this browser window at a very tiny size, where it should be more like that. But to fit more on my browser, I have done that. So anyways, next section here, so that will be the Bible logo and it will be replaced. And then we're going to get into this, how it works. And we're going to come back to the setup of this guy down here. So how it works is using the page header. And call it scalable. And inside here, it's going to have a background color of U primary -BG, which will bring in that. And I'm going to make it be a U dis IB, so it's not a block and it goes that way. And then I'm going to add spacing around it. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to add a span here and then add class U space, which is going to be padding. 1 and 3 means top and bottom. So I like to think of this in regards to, we have 1 being the top, and then the right hand side is 2, the bottom is 3, and then 4 is the left hand side. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if I say 1 and 3, that means top and bottom. 2 and 4 means right and left. So that's how that is set up. So it's kind of an unsemantic way of doing it. And then I'm going to give it more space on the sides to 4. And I'm going to call these ones smalls. What I'm going to also give this is a special name that says like and I'm actually going to remove this background color from here. And this is going to be the first CSS that I actually write for this project. So it's called C style header. And in C style header, I'm going to give it a background color of my Sass variable called color primary. And it's going to have a color inside of it of primary contrast. And then I'm going to write a pseudo class, which is an and after, and write content, which will make this be available to see. And we're going to make this be a position relative because this background is going to have a position absolute, so it's anchored to that parent. And it is going to have a height of 100% and a width of 100%. And I need to give it a display block so it aligns inside here. Right now, you're not going to be able to see this, but that's because I haven't done an offset of this, and I'm going to offset it by 4 pixels. And from the bottom, 4 pixels. If I make this bigger, you will be able to see this. Why isn't that showing? So this is how a content works. You can inject text after me, so if you can see that I do these question marks, those are going inside the style header. And then this guy is doing this way. Let's do it this way. All right. I don't know if I just can't see that inside here. Oh, I know why. That was right from the beginning. I just forgot to add a color in here. So I can say color primary accent. Come on. Oh, now I deleted the content. Ay. So there we go. So that was the box that I was trying to make. And in reality, how I had it before would have been better. So if I go width 100% and then height 100%, which will make it be the 100% of this box right here. And then it's going to be offset down that way and then offset down that way. But I need to make this be a z-index of 1, and then this is z-index of 0, so it goes behind. Cool. And why is that happening? Let's do one thing here. This will give us a little bit more flexibility. Cool. So inside here, I've made the background color actually on the span, and then that drop shadow actually comes before and after this. One of the things I'm going to do is probably make those edges, instead of it being like this sharp edge right here, it's going to go this way. Another way I could have done this was just using a box shadow. So if I use box shadow and I say -2 pixels or -4 pixels, -4 pixels, 0, and I say color primary accent, I can also get the same kind of effect for this. Let me change this to something that you'll see. So that's now up there. And if I want this to be from the top, I can fill in that one block right there. Oops. And I want this to be a positive 4. Jeez Louise, I'm messing this up so bad. I am continuously messing this up. There we go. So now that one box could be filled in. And I could do all this as opposed to a pseudo class, just using box shadow. There isn't a right or wrong. The only reason why I wanted to do it this way is so I can also tilt this. Good question, Kevin. I just talked about that right there. And it's because I also want these to have a bit of a rotation. If I go transform, even though it's not in my design, it kind of is. It goes out just a slight bit. If I do rotate, like -1 degree, that box shadow, you can't do that in a box shadow, but you can do that in this guy. So there's some various things that I can do here that I can't do in a content, and I kind of want it to look more like this as opposed to this drop shadow inside there. So I have a little bit more things. So again, it was kind of thinking forward on this, but that is also correct. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change these to rems. So this is also built in, and I'm going to change this to rem -4. So if I scale this up, it will also scale. And I can also do these as m's, and it will work the same way. So this is inheriting from the parent and going down that way, which is kind of cool. But rems are from the root. And doing it that way. And then I can do other things inside here. Instead of this being 1.3, I'm going to do tiny to tighten that. And the reason why I wanted these here is if I wanted one to have more spacing, or if I wanted to go to a section header, I could still have the same look of this. If I went to article subheader, I still get kind of the same look of this, and it's just really flexible to kind of build this out. Cool. But I'm going to go back to page header scalable, and we have this guy right here. And then I'm going to add in a rotate, utility -rotate. And I need to come up with a good naming convention for these because I do want to use these all the time. So for this, I'm going to say transform and if I made this even bigger, like 4, this whole thing is going to shift. So that's how we're going to get that look of these. And I'm going to make various types of these from like small, medium. I can do a reverse one. So if I had these next to each other, I could have one going one way and one going the other way. Now, this is going to be probably one of the more complex sections, so I'm going to also make this be unlist to remove the numbers here, and then we're going to have these different sections. I'm going to build out the first one first. Let's say uClass oflex, and I'm also going to give it a wrap so they can wrap. And then I'm going to use that same helper that I had earlier on. And oh, I didn't realize you couldn't see my mouse. I'll just try to make sure I'm clicking and highlighting things so you can see that. But right now, I'm going to make these be next to each other. I'm going to go like this. Go like this. So how it works. And then these sections, I'm going to space this from the top. And I apologize. I know everyone's been looking forward to seeing Donald Trump speak tonight. And I'm probably, just due to time, this is taking a little bit longer as I walk through things. If I was just doing this on my own, I'd be like whizzing through it, but I'm trying to explain things as I go through it, so it does take a little bit more time. I was thinking that 2 hours would be enough, but we did start about 20 minutes late, and I took a little bit walking through the overall project. But I do want to at least do this one section here and get this baseline of this together so you can see this. All right, so I'm going to copy this code, or this copy here, and I'm going to put it here. Donald Trump's an idiot. And I'm going to treat the view offers in this area as a header. C content block double underscore header. And I'm going to treat these as H3s. I'm going to copy this. As the day goes on of being on my computer, my typing gets more and more sloppy. And then I'm going to make this be an anchor. And then these will also be download links. So I'm also trying to use other keywords just for SEO benefit of this page. So if someone's searching for us, and then I'm going to use C anchor here, C anchor light, which is one of those styles that I had. I'm also going to borrow that over here and use that on iOS and Android. They both have the underline here. If I wanted to get rid of that from the way that I have this set up is I do default. Now the underline's removed on this one, but it's on there. So if I go C anchor default, now they both have it. Now only one has it. And I'm going to give the exact same treatment on here. So these are more hidden links than anything, but they do work and they would actually take the person there, whether or not they realize that it was link. And that's what I was talking about earlier is the title tags. Those are for SEO, but they do also have some helpful use right there. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this be, actually, I want to just make that be bold. I don't know why that's happening, so I'm going to have to come back to that at a later time. I'm treating this as a paragraph header, and I want that actually being applied to this entire block. So now those are treated the same way, even though this is an H3. So why I've done this is for SEO, this will be picked up as well as this, and it'll be treated as properly formatted text, and that is how I want these to come across. And I want to make this be not really sure what's happening here. Give me one quick second. Oh. Put these all in the same. There we go. Not dick, div. And because these are in an LI, I'll treat them as, geez Louise. All right, so I'm going to call this a component that's called like how it works item or simple content block. And then I'm going to call this image, and I'm going to call this content. and I'll explain why I did that here in a second. And then these are all part of how it works. So this is how it works item. And that's going to have some stylistic pieces here shortly. These guys are required for this look of this. And I'm also going to add some space in between so they're not butting up against each other. I can either do use-based children, which is going to do this. But if I do it this and this other method that I talked about earlier, uGrid between space, this creates a gutter around all of them and like offsets it, which is really nice for responsive. So once this is too big, it will actually stack inside of it. I'm going to add a class called uFull here. And I'm just going to do an oflex1 here so it expands out. So this is looking good and spaced out kind of how I want it to be. And the only thing is, if I want my text to be aligned centered, I could do something like this. And now it's aligned center in the middle of this, which is really nice. I could do that for both of them if I wanted to say oflex align items center as opposed to individually. So I hit save. It has the same look and feel. And then if I wanted this one to be, so if I didn't have this here, if I delete this, it's at the top. But by adding this here, they're both centered to each other, which is nice. But now I have the flexibility if I want to say end, and then that's going to be at the end. So you kind of get best of both worlds by that. So I'll just leave it that way. And so if this text is longer, then that's going to be centered. If this is longer, this is going to be centered, which is really, really cool. Another thing I'm going to do is, so this is space from here to there. I'm going to say use space sections and say large, and I'm going to keep it that way. So it's going to add space in between just these two LIs, which is cool. And how that's actually treated is, if I look at this, uSpace is looking at the star inside, and then the element afterwards gets a padding top. So the top one doesn't get it, but the second one does, and every reoccurring after one would also get it. So we have this. And that structure is pretty much ready to go. The only thing that I want to do here is just say give it that look. Cool. These will also have their own rotation. And I have different ways that I'm thinking about doing this. So I'm going to copy this, and this is going to be 1 for 1. If I was using a dynamic library or a tool generator, I would only write these once and usually create a loop for it, but I'm not, as you can see. Byproducts. This one doesn't really have a content in between. It's just another header. So I may have to rethink about how I'm doing that, how I'm doing these little callouts. But right now, the design goes from image, text, text, image, and goes that way. Now, I have various ways of doing this, but I'm going to treat this through CSS and not use a global one. So if I want to change how these actually operate and work, I can. So let's just highlight this. I'm just going to say anything underneath it. I'm just going to have an outline, 1 pixel solid, lime just so we can see what's happening here. So there's going to be these guys inside here, how it works, and the elements inside are being outlined. I don't know why that's happening. So all the LIs inside of here are going to be outlined. So those are going to be broken down. What I want to say is if there's a how it works plus another how it works is I'm going to do the reverse order. Oops. So what this is looking at is for every element that comes after another one, the flex direction is going to actually go in the opposite order. So it's like the easiest way from going from this way to this way and then building out the same template so you can have something like this actually occur. Now the only other thing that I need to do is say inside C content main and that's actually aligned to a, I can't remember what I did for the DOM here. Yeah, C content block. Cool. So my text is going to be right aligned. So this one's left aligned by default, and then this one's being right aligned right here. So that's how that's all coming together. Next thing that I want to do is globally, I want to change how we have the symbol block content. And this is going to have a max width of, these are all various sizes. So that's going to make it be a really annoying decision to make, but I'm going to say around 180, and I may change how that looks. It's too small. Let's make them 300. .320, so we can try to get that area up there. Cool. And then the rest of this I can probably deal with just spans. So like this favorite from your favorite location. Wasn't enough to do that. And then I'm also going to do this then. See if that gives me it. Because I want to try to avoid using a display block here. Oh, if I could type, that would have been that would have happened already. There we go. So now this is actually aligning pretty nicely. And then we could even treat this in the way of doing the rotations to be treated in almost, I don't know, dynamic way. But I'm just going to show you that if I add another one, the other item is going to be on the left-hand side. Oops. This is actually how I want to do this. It's been forever since I've had to write that. So just the even ones are getting that, and the odd ones. If I wanted to do odd, reverse this, the first one would be on that side and the other one would be the other way around. And what I will do is, because I like this setup, but if I wanted to add some kind of like flair to this and give this some additional, I don't know, rotation, what I'm going to do is say rotate children. Sounds really creepy to say that out loud. And I'm going to put this in its own here. All right. And then I'm going to add that helper class, and because it's a little bit more specific, I'm going to do this. So these are just going to output, see how it works, and then append this at the end. And then this is going to add that inside here, just keeping it one kind of solid block, which is nice. Kevin, what are you laughing at? Was it my... Did I say something weird or do something weird? Or was it Donald Trump on TV? Who knows? All right, so I'm going to say wrote children. I actually wrote a library that has a pattern for this. But before I go into that aspect of it, I'm just going to start with and nth child odd, and then we'll do transform, translate. It was about rotating the children. That's not the creepiest thing I've said today either. Oops. I do have to apply this to something. There we go. So you can see that every nth, even and odd, are getting also like this really ridiculous over the top shift on side here. And then I can do the same treatment on the images to then also offset them and do something like that. Now, I did say I wrote a library that does patterns. So doing something as simple as like this to that to this to that is kind of boring because you can easily see that it's going this way. And that's where using something like a pattern, you can create various different things. So you can rotate them, and I could create a pattern of about 10 or 20. So if I had 20 items inside this list, I wouldn't see it repeating until it got there. So you include some kind of pattern which has classes inside of it, and then it just extends them and creates something like this. So these are just extending the different patterns inside here. So for me to include this library, I'm just going to do it really quick. For ease of this demo, instead of getting into, I'll add it in here. I just deleted something by mistake. Oops. I don't know what I just did. Anyways, I'm going to add these into my tools here. And this has this demo inside here, which I'm just going to remove. So this is my repeat pattern mixin, which is actually being included right here from the tools. So I put that inside there. And now I have the ability to utilize the setup of this. And I haven't used this since I wrote this. I wrote this, I think, for a challenge by someone to come up with a CSS repeating pattern. So let's see if this even works nowadays. Let's see. So I'm just giving this a quick little try on here. We'll just put it at the very end of the document. Come on, work. Did not save. The only thing that I can think of is I don't think I'm watching that folder for when that file updates. Wait, undefined mix and repeat pattern. Oh, I'm not including that library. There we go. There we go. All right, so that's the repeating pattern, I guess, of that guy. If I wanted to use the other one, which was called pattern repeat, I now have that rainbow look, and that's just extending it. So good. All right, we know that works. To keep this momentum going on that, I'm just going to utilize the setup that I had there. And I'm going to create something called rotate 1 and 2. We'll give it a -5 degree. And then I'm going to copy this a few times. I could write something that generates this completely at random, or I can come back to this at a later time and do something more. We can do 3 degrees. How about 3s, 10. 4 is, how about 6, and then 5. All right, so these are placeholder selectors, so they don't actually get outputted out as anything. Paint by numbers. All right, so now if I hit save, you'll see that this pattern repeats and those go in like crazy ways, which is really, really awesome. This -10 is probably throwing this off a little bit too much, but I can now easily like finagle these and play with these how I want, with the flexibility of knowing like that that this pattern can repeat. So how I'm going to utilize this is I'm going to move this at the very top. This. And instead of this nth child, I'm going to put it right here. Want to do it up one more level. There we go. Give me 1 second. So it goes from parent. Let's see. Oh. I'm going to just create a new class here instead of doing this. Container wrapper, where are these guys? So you rotate children -1. So I can create various versions of this if I wanted to. So this is going to be a utility helper that lives on its own, and these are applied directly to the direct descendants of the children, as opposed to making that a modified. This makes a little bit more sense, and then I can make some variations of this very easily, similar to like what I was saying about like the headers. I could treat them the same way by kind of extending them out. All right, so now that I have this, I can create other patterns based around that, and you can see that these are being rotated kind of at random. And I could do the same thing for the images inside of it and actually extend it more to a different selector inside there if I wanted to. So as I said, like I'm kind of over on time extremely. I do want to fix a few of these because it's amazing how a minimal amount of rotation adds so much here. So if I do something like maybe like 2, I say this one's like -3, it gives it not as much of the dramaticness that you may want to have, but at least it makes it a little bit more legible. But you can always play with that because they don't. These are just the rotation of what they wanted to, and if I wanted to do something crazier like color is red, oops, I could do that too. So the children will become red inside there. So patterns can repeat in any which way. And I can even apply this to the global piece. If I turn off this won't look as dramatic either. And then lastly, because I've been working on this kind of smaller, I'm going to do this. How do I want to align this? This doesn't have a width attached to it. We'll just do this, go flex. Nope, don't want to do that. I'm going to give this a width. This would be the easiest way of me to center this in the page, unless I just want to put it. There's various ways of doing. That's the difficult thing with like front end is there's a million ways of doing things. It just depends on how difficult you want to make them. So that's centered in the page like that. And then one of the things I noticed was when I made this big, this is expanding out a little bit too big. I may want to make this size smaller so these are closer together in the middle. And with that, I need to make this image way bigger than I did, but I can fix that from the responsive standpoint. And I also have this width going out way, way, way too far. So that's something I will actually refine. And the best way for me to kind of fix all this is instead of using wrap, I'm going to use inner. And that's going to bring those in closer together. So those are all coming together in this like same gutter and width. And then I could decide how I want to treat these bottom sections, if I want to keep it the same width or go in a different direction. Lastly, let's just fix that image at the bottom that's like killing my mind, how it's going like this. So we're just going to say class view full. So and change this to inner. And then I would treat, how I did these background lines that I was talking about here, the same way that I treated this, and just do a pseudo class and kind of make it be going across the entire screen. Another thing I'm probably going to do is I'm going to make this have scalable text. An example of a project that I did like this, if it's still up, was iot.cardinalsolutions.com. Yeah, it's not. But the entire project was scalable, and it took over the full screen. And as the screen got smaller, it shrunk down. It was a nice effect, and this is a pretty wide screen, so it gives me a little bit more flexibility. So due to time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit this. Oops. So I can have that out there. So if I make any additional changes, those are put out there. But as I said, due to time, I think I'm going to call it a day here. And I know it's a little bit kind of difficult to respond to questions here. But if anyone has any last minute questions, maybe for the next 5 minutes, I'll take some. And when I do have this completed, I'll do a bit of a walkthrough on how this was built and those remaining pieces. I still need to do a walkthrough on app.bybap.com and how we actually built this out and not only made it be a web app, but also made it be a hybrid application for iOS and Android, so using PhoneGap and the technology behind it. The Columbus Web Group is back too, and Vitaly's going to be doing a weekend workshop on the Columbus Web Group. So like all my other videos, my videos are available on webseries.nicetransition.com. You'll see a large list of videos and the items inside there. So this is considered episode 9. If you didn't realize, I misspelled episodes so far. And then youtube.columbuswebgroup.com has all of our previous presentations and videos. So you can actually go in here and view all of our previous weekend workshops that we've done, as well as our monthly meetups. So if there's something that you want to learn, we are doing more of these, and I'm continuing to do my web series. So like this is a really great outline to how to use Sketch. So I talked about Sketch earlier. That's available on youtube.columbuswebgroup.com, and then my rest of my videos on the webseries.nicetransition.com. So any questions? Lastly, the same styles that we're utilizing here are the same styles that I'm utilizing here. So we're reusing the CSS from the ByBap on this application. So the only CSS that I actually wrote today was this minimal CSS that was just for these rotations and that styled header. So when I'm doing projects today, when using UIArc, for an entire project, my CSS the CSS that I write is primarily like something as long as this, because I'm just using my framework. So the question is, what's the easiest way to reprocess a SCSS file? I'm not sure if I know what you mean. Once an SCSS file is output, so if I look at my dist folder here, I go to assets in the styles, so the application.css right here is the compiled CSS that I wrote today. So like I said, style dot. If I look at these in comparison to each other, we have style header. Style header came across where this has the ending right there, and style header after. So these are all part of that. It actually outputs as their own selectors and writes the actual CSS. Format's a little weird, but you can see that these utility classes are gone, and that mixin generated the math here because it knew that there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inside here, and this is using that pattern. So if I had 6 items, it would then go back to this first one and repeat it. There isn't a way to recompile Sass. That's why the issue with Sass, if someone doesn't realize that your project or framework is written in Sass and they start updating the dist SCSS, it's going to get overwritten the next time this Sass file is compiled. So that's a word of caution there. Okay, I know there's a bit of a delay in between. We didn't really hit our goal of completing this, but it's a pretty good start, and you can see where I'm going to go with it. As I said, once I'm done with it, I'll align and post how I completed it. I could probably do just an entire class on how I'm doing the treatment of this and how it's going to be in the background. I brought this site up before, but if I would go to bundybakingsolutions.com, the way that I've treated images is I like to keep them in a form factor and then kind of layer them in the back. So this looks like this is a background image, but it's actually an image that's stacked here. And if I look at this and I go to content here, it's all here, but then there's an asset and an image, and the image is actually right here, and it's being layered in the background. And that's the same treatment that I'm going to be doing for this guy over here. And it's a process called I can't think what it's called. Let's do this. It's a methodology that Tim Bonnelow came up called asset template guides. So if you do a search for Kevin Mack and asset template guides, you can see what an asset template guide is, the benefit of them, and the responsive and like how it relates to the digital landscape. But it's basically taking into account the way that we did print design and aligning it to the same mechanics of web and using the same outlines and components to build a solution from small screens to large screens, and having those bleed marks and crop marks kind of built in there the same way. So, two different presentations of me talking about this, but I do talk about this, and I'll probably follow up and include that inside of this. All right, well, thank you for those that were watching. I think there were maybe at most 3 people at one point. And if you like this, leave a comment, because I never know if this format's better than the other format. Both are awkward for me because I'm just sitting in a room by myself. I didn't record this one in my studio because I kind of ran out of time and kind of had to like put this together very quick. So I appreciate you hanging in there as I kind of fumble through some of this. But thanks a lot, and I post all my stuff on Twitter. I'm Nicetransition. I'm Nicetransition on Instagram. I'm Nicetransition on GitHub. I'm Nicetransition on Codepen. So follow me and leave comments, ask